But what you'll find is either way, if plasma life exists, then what you could possibly have is literally every star could be alive, as in conscious, which just seems insane. But that would imply that everything would at some state probably be conscious, or at least linked to this conscious field.
Chris Lehto, welcome to LehtoFiles.
This is from Teodorani's speculative book, The Hyperspace of Consciousness. So here we go. A natural phenomena shows very anomalous characteristics. So as it will be discussed later, such anomaly might be related to the BLH hypothesis. The BLH hypothesis is the big library hypothesis, is actually a very old hypothesis. And the way I would relate it to our modern thinking is the multiverse. So basically, there's a giant library of every infinite option of every universe, right? Because why do we have fundamental constants in our universe? Why do we have Planck's constant? We'll see Planck's constant later on in this video. The Planck's constant is just an insane number, little h, right? These fixed numbers in our universe, pi, all these other fundamental principal numbers. And when I actually interviewed Kurt Jaimungal on this channel, the main takeaway I got from interviewing him is that we actually have no single reference to describe anything, okay? In order to describe something, you have to relate it to something else. So you have to relate it to something else. And often in our mathematics, all of our systems, the way all of our math works is there's a random number, just a random number comes out of thin air, and Planck's constant is one of these numbers. You know, the speed of light, okay, that is another just number that seems fixed into our universe. So the big library hypothesis states that there's this giant library, an infinite library, if you imagine both directions, and there's every option of every universe. So all the numbers would be completely different in other universes, right? But in this universe, it just so happens that all of the constants just were picked randomly off the shelf and happen to allow for life. And that's why life has emerged into this universe. And that's why all the physical constants are the way they are, right? So this is like the multiverse. We're surrounded by infinite other books, right? In the past, they just thought of an infinite library. They couldn't imagine maybe the multiverse. Okay, so that is the big library hypothesis. Minerals contained in some rocky areas and mountains, especially near fault lines, are sometimes able to indirectly produce luminous plasma balls of long duration at low height. So this is about Project Hestal. And so Massimo has done tons of investigation from Italy, right? He has gone up to Norway, but he's been their basically go-to astrophysicist. This is his argument for how it works. What is the reason of Hestal? And he argues it could be these plasma balls of intelligent life. This can be due to piezoelectric effects when rocks are under stress, especially of a seismic nature, or due to effects similar to physical phenomena have also been simulated in a laboratory. So he's proposing that these lights could be actually generated from the Earth. So we could actually be creating this type of life, this type of plasma life could be generated from the Earth through these type of weird effects in geology, etc. The main physical causes producing anomalous light phenomena are today sufficiently well understood. But what we still don't know are the physical reasons why such light phenomena, often characterized by several colors and able to pulsate, show a long duration, i.e., which physics governs the plasma confinement mechanism. So we don't have any actual physical explanation for the duration of these effects, right? For these hour-long effects that they're seeing in Project Hestal, and when they have these red balls of light just sitting there, it seems like a light source for hours. That doesn't make sense. Your ball lightning is seconds. So there's no actual good explanation is what he's explaining here for the duration of the plasma confinement mechanism. Another mystery is constituted by the fact that sometimes light balls are able to acquire geometric shape. Several studies have been conducted by some researchers, including this author, in which it's been possible to build up quite clear empirical and observational picture. Of course, several physics theories have been proposed to try to explain the mechanism of long-lasting plasma confinement, but none of them resulted to be satisfactory so far. So again, there's still no good model. We don't even have a good model. Before presenting a new hypothesis that seems to be quite a lot related with much of what has been discussed so far, we must make extensively two important premises. So these are kind of his main arguments, right? Thesis kind of the paper is that One, the particles composing a plasma, which sometimes behaves as a quantum coherent medium, might resemble the behavior of the microtubules in the brain. Okay, so what he's basically saying is there are quantum effects going on that can mimic the microtubule effects that's put forth the argument by Penrose. So Penrose, and basically we'll explain it here later, he argues that microtubules is where actually we can receive and transmit consciousness, is what his argument is. And basically, Massimo is saying that plasma can exhibit the same behavior. It can behave as a quantum coherent medium as a microtubule, like a microtubule in the brain. So the same function that microtubules do for humans, right? Massimo is saying that happens in plasma. So that's his first argument. The second one is the behavior of plasma under particular conditions seems to simulate human DNA. Let's now discuss them. Okay, so his second one is there's plasma elements when it mixes with gas. Plasma, according to Massimo, is that it can form helix structures. All right, here we go. So many years ago, David Bohm's first theoretical physics studies dealt with plasma. It's the fourth state of matter. He discovered that plasma may behave as a highly cooperative structure, like if particles, ions and electrons that are even very far away from each other are able to feel instantaneously what happens to one of them. This would be like your quantum entanglement. This gives to plasma, at least qualitatively, a structure of coherence that is not dissimilar to the coherence found in quantum objects. So coherence means even, I believe it's entanglement. So even across great distances, you're exactly lined up and can link to each other, basically. Therefore, the many particles composing plasma behave like if they were only one entity and not separated from each other, in such a way that any action done on a group of particles is just felt by another group of particles composing the same plasma agglomerate. To me, this sounds like what Michael Levin is discussing when he talks about what is intelligence. Plasma cells, if you will, if they're actually trying to solve an actual problem or organize toward one goal. That's how Michael Levin discusses intelligence found through different methods. So at this point, it's not so difficult, at least qualitatively, to find a strict similarity between plasma particles and the microtubules inside brain neurons. So this is where he's relating it to the previously amped discussion, or. Okay, this is Penrose Hamerhoff theory about brain states. The microtubules and tubulins therein act like only one entity. And really what they do is they collapse the wave function. That's according to Penrose. This is orchestrated objective reduction, is a theory which postulates that consciousness originates at the quantum level inside neurons rather than the conventional view that is a product of connections between neurons. What he's putting forward is that there are very, very small, super small level, right? That are your cells, the microtubule cells can be a receiver or a transmitter into what could be a field of consciousness, right? If you consider that now the material world is not fundamental to this universe, if consciousness or some sort of field like the Akashic records, let's say the big library, right? The big library is an infinite multiverse. Akashic records is actually an infinite energy field of all knowledge, right? And either way, it's some sort of field. I just bring up Akashic records as an interesting example. But if you had consciousness as fundamental to this universe, then what you could imagine is you have some way to tap into that field biologically. And that could be what these microtubules actually do, is not necessarily create, but it's taking the senses from this world and then acting as a transmitter receiver to some sort of field through the quantum world, through this quantum entanglement, through what he's talking about here. The mechanism is held to be a quantum process called objective reduction, also known as models of spontaneous wave function collapse or dynamical reduction models. So basically, what is actual reality? What he's proposing is the observer essentially collapses the wave function. So decides just by observing it, objectively reducing it, it collapses the wave function orchestrated by cellular structures called these microtubules. Okay, so you understand that, right? The or Penrose Hamerhoff theory about the brain states that microtubules and tubulins and therein act like one entity, and they describe the same wave function. So they collapse the wave function and they give us consciousness. This is the argument. When, according to Penrose's physics model, the wave function spontaneously collapses, a moment of consciousness is generated in such a way that an average human being is able to experience at least 1 million moments of consciousness every day, daily. So, based on our dimension, the way I think of it, on our dimensional size, it took however many billions or trillions of neurons that we have organized through some sort of manner to actually give us 1 million conscious elements per day. And that's where Penrose, he uses Planck's number here to determine that actually the number of events is equal to Planck's constant h divided by t, which is time, right? It's kind of like energy. Instead of E equals mc squared, Penrose says E equals h over t. So energy, or events, as he calls his big E, is equal to actually Planck's constant, this random number, divided by t. And that gives you a number of events. According to all the calculations on the sizes and everything, he says that comes out to 1 million conscious events per day. And, I think of it this way for UAPs, right? If you look at all these UAP interactions, how many of these interactions always have a weird time element, right? Or like in aerial school, they move weird when the beings are seen. They seem to skip, or they do the things again, or they do them backwards. It seems like there's something wrong with the clock, that like our clock is different from their clock. It could be our experience, the clock that we use to actually tick, 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 tick to see, right? To experience this universe through our systems is on a totally different clock timer. We have said that we consider as consciousness can be strictly related to the idea that we have of spirit in the ambit of a model, following also Bohm's concepts about implicate and explicate orders, in which consciousness, spirit, and its neural correlate, the brain, are strictly linked together in a way that the one cannot exist without the other. So he says you do need the actual, I guess, consciousness and spirit and the neural correlate. You need the brain linked together, okay? So now let's come to plasma, he says. Can the elementary particles constituting a plasma be compared to microtubules in order that such particles, by composing a cooperative entity, right, described by only one wave function, so because they collapse the wave function, when working in unison all together, can this give rise to the emergence of consciousness? So can the same thing happen that we are experiencing, right? We know that we experience consciousness, and we maybe, hopefully, we're getting in close. We're zoning in on why it is, although this is the only actual model I've even heard of. I was like, what are the alternate models? I asked ChatGPT, what are the alternate models for this, for Penrose's theory? And there was basically none. There's nothing. Okay, so this is what we have right now. And he says it's plasma. Can it do the same thing? He says he believes it can't. We are simply hypothesizing that some plasma balls might work at certain circumstances as a brain capable to produce moments of consciousness. But being a brain implies being a form of life. Is it possible that a life form made of plasma exists? It seems so, according to some studies stimulating its behavior. So I'd like to ask Massimo, what are these studies? But basically, he's hypothesizing that even if it's not intelligent, maybe these plasma balls could be some form of consciousness. Maybe even if it's just a logical, bacterial type entity. Maybe it's not super intelligent, or maybe it is intelligent, but either way, it's conscious, is what he's arguing. Numerical simulations show that when a plasma comes in contact with a cloud of fine dust grains, they immediately acquire an electric charge, sucking electrons from the plasma surrounding them up to form a core of electrons, which in turn attract the positively charged ions of the plasma itself, thus giving rise to plasma crystals. Okay, so that's a long sentence there. So basically what he's saying is, according to numerical simulations, when you have fine dust, okay, so fine dust interacts with plasma, what happens is the dust grains immediately acquire an electrical charge. And so they actually form a gradient, an electrical gradient, sucking electrons from the plasma. And what happens is you form a core of electrons that attract positively charged ions from the plasma itself. So effectively forming a structure, which Massimo says is called plasma crystals. So plasma crystals, driven by electrostatic forces. Dust grains are full twisting and helical structures. He says they are full helical while the plasma becomes polarized. So polarized means plus or minus, right? So if you helical structure, polarized plasma, and the plasma crystals acquire shapes that rapidly evolve into a double helix identical to that which characterizes the DNA and which shows a self-organizing exceptional ability. So this is computer numerical simulations. It's what he is arguing. The dust interacting with plasma, it's just gas and dust right out in the cosmos. Dust interacting with plasma can actually create DNA helical structures. This shape is replicated in other plasma crystals as if these forms could reproduce by sending a genetic code in everything surrounding them. This is quite interesting because if you look now at our cosmology, I can't even say it. It's so broken though. They keep saying we need an alternate view of reality. We need an alternate view, especially with JWST has just broken so many things right in half. And what they've actually found is just structures larger than we could possibly imagine. If you notice the ring of galaxies, it's 1.3 billion years across. We know now black holes are probably different from what we consider they are. They're probably not this kind of imaginary singularity. They probably are actually something, right? It's not just a black hole. That's just how we describe things in our lack of knowledge. I think also the same thing will be found of dark matter and dark energy. So what he's finding is they have actual studies showing that this does happen. The simulation shows that these helixes have two stable configurations represented by a small and a large spiral, while each helix contains various sequences of these two states. Researchers believe that such dynamic feature allow these structures to store information. So to actually store information and act like DNA does, right? Because I've argued in my fractal universe theory that it's size independent. You have scalar independent systems. So plasma systems, even large systems, possibly even like the sun. Okay, so although we'll go into a little later how the sun may not be a plasma, but what you'll find is either way, this would argue, right? If plasma life exists, then what you could possibly have is literally every star could be alive, as in conscious, which just seems insane. But that would imply that everything would, at some state, probably be conscious, or at least linked to this conscious field. So I don't see why we wouldn't even see that things like the sun could actually be the life that we're looking for. Where's all the UAPs? Probably could be right there. Oh man, it's gonna be so awesome. The sun. That's what George Carlin said. He's like, what should you worship? Just the sun. You can see it. Right, the helix appears as a kind of informative code, which eventually leads to replicate through any structural transformation from one generation to another. So this is what we find through our universe, even neural networks. If you look at actually neural networks, they work through evolution. Your neural network actually works by going through layers, through time. And then you get information back. You have forward flow and backward flow. All it is information from one generation to another through time, right? And to give shape to increasingly complex and stable structures, a code at all comparable to the genetic information holding together the organic matter, and with the characteristic of producing exactly as a living cell. In other words, it does seem that such structures made of dust and plasma is real living beings, able to reproduce and evolve. Man, Massimo, so awesome, man. I can't believe I didn't read this before our interview. If this is the case, is it possible that a form of plasma life exists everywhere in the universe, from the interstellar space to our atmosphere? Transient light phenomena, whose plasma nature has been demonstrated in the course of instrumented observational research carried out in Hessdalen, Norway, and in other similar places in the world, seem to trace quite closely the behavior of plasmas and dust recorded through these numerical simulations in the forms of balls of light that tend to divide, join, multiply, follow a spiral motion resembling the behavior of a living cell. After studying Project Hessdalen for so many years, right? I would guess I'll have to ask him, but I believe he's been on for over a decade. His best speculation is that actually it is the plasma life, transient light phenomena. So this plasma nature that's been demonstrated in Hessdalen traces quite closely the behavior of plasmas and dust recorded through numerical simulations. So it matches. Numerical simulations match what they're seeing out in Heston if you assume that this stuff is alive, right? Plasma life. These balls of light contain substantially the same ingredients as simulated plasma crystals. Plasma and atmospheric dust in aerosol form with water vapor as a possible catalyst, generating thermo-electrical chemical processes able to confine these plasma spheres. So how do you contain the plasma sphere, right? How does it stay in its little aerosol form? And he's saying it's actually because it's a living being and somehow it's evolved and formed to that. Such anomalous light phenomena have a tendency to multiply and evolve, and do so on timescales of the order of minutes or even seconds. We want to test the hypothesis that such phenomena may acquire some level of elementary intelligence, which would be manifested through regular or semi-regular light pulsation. All this can be accurately measured using high-speed photometry by acquiring 10,000 frames per second and then analyzed using time series analysis. So when I did interview Massimo, he said that he wanted to use 10,000 frames per second cameras, which just seemed insane to me. I know you can do that, but I hadn't considered it for this. Interesting, he thinks that you could have these plasma balls evolving on seconds through these thermo-electrochemical processes. In few words, from what has been extensively discussed above, it might be possible to hypothesize that if really plasmas are able to become, in certain conditions, life forms, then a part of them might evolve towards forms of intelligence that is more or less sophisticated. So if you do have life, right, he says you do have consciousness, and then it's in the same organization that we know of intelligent life, then you would just assume, extrapolate up and down, right? So you could have like dumb forms of plasma balls and really smart plasma balls, I guess. The consequences of such a hypothesis would be really disruptive. They would, because then for any life form, even intelligent, based on plasma, a planetary atmosphere would be almost irrelevant for them to live, as there should be no need of a habitability zone as we've conceived it until now, such as other projects like the SETI project. So what is the reason maybe we're not finding any life? If we are in fact surrounded by life, it's right there. We're not considering it, because when I looked, what are the best counter arguments against Penrose's actual theory is that it's just not possible. And if you look at what's actually the best counter argument against the plasma balls, the argument they will contend is it's just not possible. You know, I guess you just have to find overwhelming evidence, or it's incorrect. Like we said, it's a speculative theory. I just think we need to look at other theories right now in the cosmology world, and here is one. According to this scenario, life forms based on plasma might truly live everywhere in the universe. If this were effectively the case, all the planets of the solar system, even those with poisonous atmospheres, might indifferently harbor life forms of this kind. We've also seen on Venus, they have phosgen, only produced, known that we know about from plankton. So you could have life in the actual gas clouds of Venus, right? Imagine that. And imagine if you had plasma life. That would change everything. I mean, that would mean like the stars could be just giant planets in their own right, just full of beings. I mean, it's amazing to think of. As it happens on the Earth, the trigger, we could denominate it as a midwife, for the birth of such plasma forms starts from natural mechanisms due to the geophysical conditions of the soil or underground, to atmospheric mechanisms, or to both. Due to different causes, the interstellar space is everywhere full of plasma at various temperatures, and this might furnish the incubator for the birth and the development of life forms that might also be characterized by intelligence, without any constraint with the biological conditions of livability as we understood them so far. This was quite interesting, because he's arguing that Earth could be like a baby factory, create these kind of forms of life and help in the development. That would mean it could be anywhere without the constraints of what we think of biological life, and again, we're also seeing all signs of life around us. We're seeing biological elements in all of the nebula out in space. We're seeing, through spectrum analysis, JWST, we found not only other planets, but everywhere we look in the nebula, we're seeing biological elements. All the precursors for life is out there, just everywhere. I'm not joking when I say we could find out that the sun is freaking alive and just this giant planet of plasma being. It is even obvious that if intelligence were able to develop inside such hypothetical plasma structures, then some form of science and technology might spring from it, in a form that is totally different from how we, sentient biochemical beings based on carbon chemistry, are able to understand it. In fact, intelligence by its nature is led to build up organized, coherent, and ordered structures. That's from Michael Levin, basically argued intelligence is the large, whatever structure it is, going towards an organized goal and finding novel ways to accomplish it. Moreover, according to this hypothesis, we cannot exclude at all that such intelligences may be able to organize in form of true neural networks for the exchange of information, which might occur also using the mechanism of quantum entanglement, which would permit the reception and the transmission of data that are not constrained by space and time. Oh man, it's amazing. But if you look at the sun, okay, plasma is the fourth state of matter, and we know nothing about it. I mean, it's just crazy. So the solar model has a lot of issues with actually what is the sun actually made out of. They say it's just hydrogen and helium, but Unzicker on YouTube, he's an astrophysicist. He says that those don't really make sense. The sun cannot be a plasma based on its temperature profile. And how can it be a gas, right? The sun has a full spectrum like a black body object. I think if the sun is conscious, it's trying to destroy us. Slavic. I don't think so. I think actually it's the center of our solar system and our cell. The Earth has some play in this whole thing. If you look at it from above, if you imagine that plasma can hold DNA, then the sun is basically the nucleus of our solar system. It's obviously the nucleus. And so could it be holding actually information for our solar system, which in a way acts as its own living cell or entity? You know, you have Jupiter. Jupiter basically defends all the interior planets. You know, it's giant gravity and magnetic wave. It just captures all your inbound meteors, etc. Protects us. You know, you have the asteroid belt. What's up with that thing? And our sun actually is a lone star. I think it's only 10% of the stars in our galaxy are single stars like this. Most of them are binary, actually. And the planet layout's quite interesting as well. So I don't think the sun's trying to kill us. I hope not. So previously, we've delved in some similar concepts. I've released a theory video, one theory video a month. It's actually, I really enjoy them so much. I'm passionate about it, why I started creating, but they're my least liked videos. But I think it's important that actually we look deep into certain topics and get the big picture, right? If I can predict where anything is going to be in the future, then I can beat it there, right? And knowledge is power. Information is so powerful. If you think information is really the root of fear in many ways, fear is really from not knowing. And so as information walls are broken down, as we can start to see through the mainstream media lies, essentially, I mean, it's such BS. You can just see it so clearly. But now I think we're able to see it, and it's really because we're looking at it from a bigger picture, right? And so that's why I do like these videos. So we start with groundbreaking work of Donald Hoffman, who he relays in this video. It's Donald Hoffman on consciousness and conscious agents. Okay, so check this out and how it relates to what I'm talking about here.
I would like to solve the hard problem of consciousness. So let me start with a mathematical theory of consciousness on its own terms. So I'm not trying to ask what properties of neurons could cause consciousness. I'm not interested. I'm asking myself the scientific question. If I knew nothing about the physical world, I just wanted a theory of consciousness, what would be the mathematical structure I would write down in consciousness? And what dynamics would I write down?
Okay, so that is Donald Hoffman. And if you've heard him talk before, he mentions a lot about these conscious agents. And what the conscious agents are to me is he's saying dissociated identities. If you combine Donald Hoffman's idea of the dashboard of our senses, that's also Bernardo Kastrup, that the material world is not fundamental. So none of our models can actually explain the conscious experience of eating chocolate. I'd argue there, like I just showed, is Penrose through his microtubules says that does create at least a model, right? You can actually use that as a model. But these conscious agents, according to when you combine Donald Hoffman and Bernardo Kastrup, is basically dissociated identities inside of the giant supermind, if you will, the source. What would that be? Is some sort of field, as again, it's related. The point is, what is your model if consciousness is the base? What is your model if materialism, the fundamental world, is not the base? Right? And there's really nothing. There's nothing really to even look at apart from what I just showed there. So just offering, there's a lot of stuff out there, the spiritual world, the NDEs. I mean, there's life after death, surviving death, with the Leslie Kane, the UAP phenomena. So there really is a lot of stuff going on out there. At least this is a model, and it's based off of idealism. Either way, consciousness is the base, is what Donald Hoffman is saying. Okay, excellent. Thank you for exploring these new ideas in the space. Your curiosity is highly appreciated. Thank you very much. From the Ryan Wood Show. Thank you, mate. Really expanding on Hoffman's concepts, we explore Bernardo Kastrup's perspective. So Bernardo Kastrup, he has an interview in Your Consciousness is Not in Your Head. He suggests that our reality may be part of a larger consciousness, offering a profound rethinking of our experience. So let's check that out.
Maybe let's start with your criticism of those scientists who interpret brain images. Please explain what is your criticism about the interpretation of brain imaging studies.
Well, I think there is nothing wrong with interpreting brain imaging from a scientific perspective. That's the primary way to study the mind, because our only access to someone else's mind is brain imaging, fMRI, MEG, EEG, PET, and so on. So I have nothing against that. I think where we go wrong is when scientists begin doing philosophy and saying that the brain is what generates the mind. Well, wait a moment. There is a correlation between the two. We can learn a lot about one from the other. In other words, we can learn a lot about the mind from brain imaging. But when we interpret that correlation as implying a certain causation, like the brain causes the mind, that's when we will artificially narrow our horizons. And I think that is unjustified. That's a philosophical step, and it's a bad one. There are plenty of reasons to think that the brain does not generate the mind, but the brain is what the mind looks like when it's observed from the outside. The brain is the image of the mind. It's the cognitive representation we make of another mind, not the generator of the mind.
Wow, that's very powerful. I kind of think of it like the real world, or how we're experiencing right now, you and me in this universe, is actually we are ideas manifested in a physical form, which I think is quite interesting. Massimo Teodorani, he said before, is they've actually experienced communication with these plasma light balls in Hessdalen, and they've used just a really low power laser, super low power laser, shined it at the light and changed the pulsation frequency of the light and the color. And so some sort of communication. And if you know about light, that should not happen if it's just light, right? So how does photon interaction happen? Normally light just passes through other light. It doesn't actually hit it. The other thing weird about the Project Hessdalen light balls is they give out full spectrums. So not discrete, like a plasma should give a certain discrete, right? If it's burning plasma and at certain temperatures based on what is actually burning, you get discrete elements. That's why your neon signs, right? You get different color neon is actually different elements in there, giving you different gas spectrum lines. So Bernardo Kastrup there suggests our reality may be part of a larger consciousness. And hit the strongest evidence that Bernardo Kastrup has that I found is his argument on dissociated identities. So if you look at people with multiple personalities, so multiple personality people, there's a lot of interaction here where whoever is actually in control, the actual person in control at the time, could see, right? And they imaged in an MRI, actually, there was no issues, everything connected, that person could see, right? But one of the alters, they called it altered personality. One of the alters was blind. And so when that alter had executive control, they put that person with that new personality in the MRI and actually imaged the connections, and it was off. It was just switched off, meaning the connections were there, right? The same physical person could see. But when an alter is there, a different person who was blind, a blind alter, actually, that person could not see and was blind. The other very interesting point here that, again, I think it's Bernardo Kastrup's most powerful, really single data point, is that when the person is dreaming, then all of the alters can actually be in the same room. So all the multiple personalities, when the biological person, like if the body is dreaming, then actually in the dreams will be multiple personalities inside the dream and can interact with each other. So Bernardo Kastrup, his argument is that this shows that in the biological world, in the physical world, we have clear examples of dissociated identities inside of the same brain. So in that case, this is a conscious agent, like Donald Hoffman said. These dissociated identities, basically arguments, if you will, inside of the same brain, are now acting as conscious agents. And so you combine these two theories, very powerful for analytic idealism. And now you just extrapolate that again onto plasma life.
We can learn a lot about one from the other. In other words, we can learn a lot about the mind from brain imaging. But when we interpret that correlation as implying a certain causation, like the brain causes the mind, that's when we will artificially narrow our horizons. And I think that is unjustified. That's a philosophical step.
Okay. So that is a huge point there, is what he's saying. And I think this really is what we're doing wrong. Is he says that the scientists are making philosophical decisions. So scientists, not philosophers, right? So he actually is a computer scientist turned philosopher. So he's done both. But scientists are making the philosophical decision that some of this stuff is not possible, right? They're taking the philosophical decision that the physical world, the material world, is fundamental to our understanding, to our conscious experience. The problem is, like I've mentioned earlier, is neural networks. How do neural networks work? I'm sure you've gotten a lot of practice working with AI, right? Your large language models, your neural network. Neural network is just a filter. Okay, it's layers of filters. That's all a neural network is, right? If you think of it through generations. So it's just layers. You start with a whole ton of inputs, right? A million books and a question, and then you end up with an answer, right? So it really is, a neural network is evolution, really. You're just evolving through filters, right? Narrowing down with a feedback loop to go back, right? If there's an idea in this world, it won't be fit for the next generation. It will die out. So everything that, at least what I've noticed, is neural networks work through evolution, which seems to be how this universe works through time, is through evolution. So I thought that was quite interesting, that if you think about it, neural networks only know what you put in them. They only know what you put in them, right? Look at ChatGPT. Up until some point, it's very smart, right? But after that, it's totally dumb. It also, if you leave out certain instances, right? They've noted biases in these AI large language model programs. The whole point is, a neural network can only answer the options, at least that we know about it, from its selected options, right? Look at the FSD, the full self-driving from Tesla. When the humans were putting in requirements, right? Humans are putting in their own restrictions on what could be the possible outcome of the solution. It didn't work. How did they get to full self-driving? And they will this year, is going to be by removing all human input. Literally just putting in the data system. Why? Because that removes all of your filters. It removes all your human bias filters, which are going to limit your data set. It's going to limit your solution set. So the reason we have no models to even come up with an idea of what's going on is because the scientists are completely philosophically removing half their brain and saying that this is not possible. And why is it not possible? Because it's not possible. So same thing with UAPs, is because it's not possible. So we don't need to look there. If you don't include it in your neural network, it will not come out as a solution set, right? That's how neural networks work. Humans are only neural networks. So I think we can agree on that. So if you wonder what that person in that other country thinks, you should know that basically what you think reversed. Reversed. Only what they've been accessed. And if you've seen more polarization, it's because the neural networks are getting less and less access, to a wide variety of information and just barreling down onto one option, philosophically cutting off huge arguments, huge solution sets you're just cutting off. And so that's, I think, a very interesting point that Bernardo Kastrup brought up there. Okay, and then my final point, the sun as a living entity. And this is quite interesting. How's everyone doing? Hope you guys are liking it. All AI is human input. I'll introduce you, if you haven't seen, Unzicker's Real Physics. I'm a subscriber for sure, man. This guy's awesome. I just found him last month. And that's what I was explaining here is about, the embarrassing nonsense of particle physics. No, we do not need a new collider. This one's amazing. 128,000 views. So he does have some views. And it's he gives it at a conference. And it's so true, right? Because what happened after Higgs boson? What happened? You got your collider, you got billions of dollars, you gave each other, accolades. I'd say something worse, nerdy accolades and awards and millions of dollars. And now they just need a bigger collider. They just need a bigger Large Hadron Collider so that they can get a better understanding. They have no understanding. There's no understanding. Okay, so what's interesting here is I saw here, the sun is a liquid. Here's why. So it goes through temperature gradients. And really what you can see is it a gas? Is it a plasma? It breaks out like based on new models. We have more information with our telescopes. You are seeing that it doesn't make sense that based on the temperature of the actual sun, right? 6,000 Kelvin, it shouldn't work. Right? It shouldn't be in this realm. Let's see what he says here, how he explains it.
Plasma here. This is at very high temperature, and you have the logarithm of the temperature plotted here. You see 6 would be, we are in the range of millions of kelvins, and this would be thousands of kelvins. But the other axis is also important. You have here Pascal, the pressure, Newton per square meters, and you see that there is a region where you have this metallic state as a solid and even as a liquid. Presumably, it's possible this is 1000 Kelvin, a little bit more, so we are in the thousands of kelvins, but we need huge pressure. And this is, of course, a problem. We have to develop a model. It will be entirely different from the standard solar model, but let's just open-mindedly think about these possibilities and evaluate it. Now,
okay, so what he's saying is our standard model does not make sense. So based on the temperature of the sun, it could not be a plasma. Okay, plasma is like up here. Based on the actual pressure, size, everything in the standard solar model is the sun should be 150,000 degrees at the surface. Instead, it's only 6,000 degrees. Okay, so that just does not make sense. If we also look here, here's how the sun actually looks. So we have new actual telescopes that can look at the sun and give us more information. So this does they call it this convection. Let's listen to this.
A little bit what we observe. It seems to be that there are regions where material is going up and sinking down. Sinking down would mean the molecular state is transformed back in the metallic state. Yeah, let's just have a look at the video of the sun's surface. You can download this from this very nice website, helioviewer.org. You see that kind of boiling surface here. You see all the turbulence, all that motion. And yeah, I didn't mention it. It has a clear surface. The sun is obviously a very distinct boundary between these two states of matter, and you cannot describe it as the standard model does it, just with one gaseous state of matter. You need that two different states which represent the boundary of the photosphere and the chromosphere.
Each one of these things is the size of the Earth, okay? And I believe they're there from 15 to 20 minutes. These are these kind of convections. But if you look, it's not like a gas or a plasma, it's almost like a solid.
Welcome to Real Physics. Is the biggest problem of solar physics a misunderstanding? Could be true. Arguably, the coronal heating problem is a huge problem for solar physicists. Now,
okay, so this is the coronal heating problem, and that's really what I mentioned, is based on what they say that the sun actually is, okay, does not match our understanding of the physics. This is what we're talking about, the solar spectrum. So if you look, the solar spectrum is at 5,900 degrees Kelvin. Based off the actual black body radiation, it matches a solid object black body radiation, okay, at 6,000 degrees. Based on, according to Unzicker, okay, again, I'm not a solar physicist, but according to Unzicker, based on our current model, this temperature doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be this low. It should be up at like 150,000 degrees. If your hypothesis is that we are the only form of life in this universe, despite seeing signs at least or evidence of life all around us, then it's going to be difficult to actually see any other types of life that's actually around us. You're just ruling them out of your neural network. So here he shows the liquid metallic hydrogen solar atmosphere. Okay, so interesting. I'm not going to use up all of his video here. I just wanted to introduce you to Unzicker. If you haven't seen it there, I'm talking about the sun. And when I actually saw those elements on the sun, those sun tiles, if you will, I thought of Massimo's actual theory. Because as Massimo says, anytime you have a gradient, plasma moving, and ions, any sort of magnetization along with dust, now you can form these helical structures. That's interesting because another subscriber sent me the fourth state of water, saying that there are some forms of water, supposedly, where you have different ions. If you go back to one of my videos, I make the argument that we're going to actually, I speculate, hypothesis, that we will actually find life anywhere we see a consistent changing energy gradient. So if you think of the Earth, we have day, night, day, night, day, night, a consistent energy gradient, right, from the sun. So it's not just burning one side all the way. That it's not really a gradient. But anywhere you have an energy gradient now, you can have Maxwell's demon. Really, life there could set up some sort of arbitrage system, right, to use that energy to, instead of creating heat out of it, to take that energy and actually convert it, to order it into matter. Could you have some sort of plasma helical structure? What is the sun? What are the stars? Would they mimic systems of normal life, right, that we would see if there is a conscious, field, if you will? And as Donald Hoffman portrays, this is all just a data structure, that maybe what we're looking at is a universe literally brimming with life, and it just doesn't care about us because we don't matter. We're just over here fighting each other over what we perceive as limited resources. But I can assure you, we do not have limited resources. We have unlimited resources, at least from our dimensional size, from the sun. And I think it's our best nuclear reactor in the sky. It's going to be amazing. I think the future is actually very bright. There's one final thought I want to leave on this theory video: the observer effect. We talked a lot today about quantum particles, right? Quantum entanglement, some sort of quantum element. And that actually relates to Penrose's argument, the one model I've heard of, at least, that somehow the neurons in our brain could create structures that would introduce some sort of gapping, like a quantum gapping, if you will. Would it get small enough that Planck's constant divided by T, right? We get 1 million of those per day based on the size of those little quantum microtubules, tapping somehow into this field, if you will, of consciousness, often referred to in the NDE world as the Akashic records or the source, or this could be how religions interact. They can tap into these, but mirrored through a certain method or thought process that they're using, because their neural network is already limited, right? There's only a certain option. If all you've ever heard about is Islam, then guess what? That's what you're probably going to believe. If all you've heard is your religion and you've grown up and that is the option, each time you think that process, the neural networks, the pathway in your brain, right, up that neural network layering process that filters it, it's only going to get what you put into it. So could it be tapping into this consciousness realm? So you have the microtubules now. Penrose relates some way to actually link transmitter and receiver through quantum processes. Donald Hoffman says that what we're looking at, our universe, actually is not fundamental. And instead, we have what's called conscious agents that are operating. So if you assume consciousness is the base, and now we lay into Bernardo Kastrup's argument, and he shows that there is proof that we have dissociated identities inside of people, biological program systems now. If you look at the whole universe, the universe based on a recent study from 2019 out of Italy, as well as that statistical and density correlations of the greater universe match that of our neurons. So basically we have scientific statistical evidence. And this is what I keep saying. Where's the evidence? There is evidence. Like, go look at it. There is statistical evidence linking the brain, how it's laid out, the nodes of the neurons to the galactic structures, the actual galactic structures of the universe, i.e., we could be inside of some giant, large brain. But like Bernardo Kastrup said, that's what it appears. That's just what it looks like. You and I look like this, but it's not what it is. As Donald Hoffman says, everything about evolution, which appears this universe, I would say this is the universe of evolution. Everything about this universe, about evolving, none of it evolves towards knowing the underlying reality. Everything towards evolution is towards fitness. What will make it through to the next layer? It's all about fitness. Finally, that goes into the idea of, could we have plasma life? Massimo Teodorani, he argues we can, because it is modeled off of the same things that we're seeing from our brains. So we're seeing the same structures in plasma, helical structures through time. So based on what Penrose is arguing, these plasma structures could be accessing the same sort of quantum effects through maybe even a different way of doing it. And that's what I've been talking about. You'll get different clocks, right? If our consciousness experiences, as Penrose says, you have Planck's constant over time, then our clocks are going to be at a certain rate, 1 million conscious moments per day, right? But say UAP comes in, whatever these things are interacting with us, plasma balls, etc., if they are conscious, interacting with our consciousness, maybe it interacts with how that clock works, and you get different weird UAP type effects.